Have you ever had a relationship strained or even broken because of differences? Maybe political, maybe cultural, maybe something else. It feels more and more like that every day, doesn't it? We're divided politically, no question. But it goes deeper than that, ethnically, socially, economically. And what often happens is we start to retreat. We stick with people who think the way that we do. We listen to the same voices, we read the same perspectives. And if we're honest, sometimes we start to caricature or even dismiss the people on the other side. Meanwhile, a lot of us don't actually like what this is doing to us. It can make us feel frustrated, discouraged, and even a bit hopeless about whether things can be different. In this series, we want to explore a different path, a better way. What we're calling living the Jesus way, a way of relating to people that actually builds bridges instead of walls. Welcome to this new podcast series called Living the Jesus Way. Our purpose is to discuss how the Jesus Way can help us build bridges across differences. It is a way to open avenues for conversations and heal relationships. The title comes from an upcoming book by Pastor Hurmon Hamilton and the sermon series he has preached. And I'm really glad to have my friend, Pastor Hurmon Hamilton, with me for this conversation. Pastor Hurmon has given much thought to this subject, and as I said earlier, he has preached on the Jesus Way and is writing a book on this topic that is scheduled to be published in the fall. Pastor Hurmon, welcome.
Thank you, Skip. It's such a privilege and an honor to be with you and to be able to talk about this. This is critical, not just to our country in this time, but it's critical to most of our families and friendship circles. As you pointed out, this is perhaps the most polarized time in recent memory.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Pastor Hurmon, you and I have known each other for about 15 years now. And over that time,
it's been that long. That's
it's
amazing.
been that long. It's been that long. Time goes fast.
That is so great. Praise the Lord. All right, go ahead. That's fabulous.
I know, I had to think about that and calculate it, but it's been about 15 years. Well, I've had a chance to see up close what you've been building, especially at New Beginnings Community Church in the Bay Area.
You've been a part of it.
Yeah, I've been a part of it since the beginning. That's right. Mm-hmm. And while most churches I know have wonderful communities where people come together, they glorify God, they love one another, they serve their communities, but they're also pretty homogeneous, maybe reflecting the community where they're located. And people tend to self-segregate. There are Black churches, Chinese churches, Korean churches, and so on. And there are churches that tend to attract people that are more progressive politically and others that are predominantly conservative. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, I don't believe, but it's a fact.
Right.
But New Beginnings is different. That's what makes it special. It's a community where people have, with real differences, political, ethnic, socioeconomic, culture, and even people of different ages, are not just coexisting, but caring for each other, serving God, growing together, building relationships. And you have been at the center of that. I know you spent a lot of time thinking about why that happens and why it matters right now. As you've said, this is a polarizing time in our country. What I want to know is what lessons we can learn to help people build bridges to overcome those differences. So maybe that's a place to start. Maybe it's with your background. Can you share a bit of your story and why you feel called, maybe even uniquely equipped for this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Give you kind of a high level view, and I'll call out some things along the way, and then I'll connect the dots towards the end. I was born in San Francisco, the fourth of four kids. At about 6 months of age, I broke out with impetigo rash, I broke out with it in my head. The doctor prescribed a treatment for me, gave me medication that was applied. At the end of the day, it turns out that I was allergic to it. And as a result of my mom applying that medication and bandaging my head to keep her 6-month baby boy from kind of gouging himself to death, it created what they call chemical burns. And so one day she unwrapped the bandages and it looked as though I had been in a house fire. All of my scalp literally melted like jelly, just breaking down. And rushed me to the hospital, and they were working on my head frantically, and stuff spilled into both of my eyes, permanently scarring my eyes. I stayed in the hospital for about a year because they had to do multiple skin graft surgeries to reconstruct my scalp. When I came out, my mom was deathly ill. She had divorced, or was in the midst of divorcing my dad, had to find someone to keep me. There was no one that wanted to take on that responsibility, still sickly. So she filled out the paperwork to put me in a foster care system. At that time, the grace of God stepped in, and my grand aunt, who lived in Coshada, Louisiana, married to a Baptist pastor, said, if you can get him here, I'll keep him. So they shipped me. By the time I got to Coshada, Louisiana, I was about 2 years old. Now, Coshada at the time is a southern town. Still saw everything was still very racialized in Coshada. It was black and white. We weren't too far removed from just, straight out segregation. Yeah. There were still some places that you would, if you were African American, you weren't supposed to be at certain times. My grandaunt was a domestic maid, and so she served her family for 30 years. I remember going to that house a few times, and I had to go around the back. I couldn't go through the front. So it gives you a real sense of the town. Anyway, I landed in that town, and at the age of 6, they raised me till I was 6, and my mom came back to regather me, but made the decision to allow my grandaunt and uncle to keep me and raise me as their only child. So big deal. That saved my life in so many ways. I started off as a special needs kid, primarily because I got into all kinds of trouble. And I had an African-American teacher that realized that, I went to school reading on a 4th grade level. She had divided the class, and I was helping her teach reading 1st and 2nd grade special needs classes. I had a white special needs teacher, Ms. Gahagan, in the 3rd grade, who recognized that I should not be a special needs student, and she went to bat all the way up to the principal's office beyond to get me out. I call that out because that was my first time where a white teacher, who in my world was supposed to be, white people were supposed to be seen a certain kind of way, oppressors, mean, can't trust. She went to bat for me and was able to do what the African-American teacher didn't do. That became a real lasting impression in my life. From 3rd grade to about the 8th grade, I still had a very tumultuous childhood. I, first to be picked on, the last to be picked to play on a game, a team, etc. So I did a lot to try to create attention. Anyway, at the 8th grade, I had a real conversion experience and really kind of gave my life to Jesus. But I like to say it took 2 years for Jesus to make the trip from my head to my heart, or from my heart to my head, rather. Yeah. It was in the 10th grade, a little fight. I got into a little scuffle with a girl that really wasn't interested in me, lost the scuffle, went into the boys' bathroom, realized that I was literally flunking out of school and that it was going to devastate my grandaunt and uncle, who by now were in their 60s and 70s. And I turned to the Lord and said, look, Jesus, they say if you have the faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. I don't need you to move any mountains. I need you to create opportunity. And when I get to the 12th grade, Lord, when I graduate, I want to be on the stage with the honor students, and I want to go to college. And I'm willing to bust my backside to make that happen if you create opportunity. And I walked out of the boys' bathroom to discover that I've been kicked out of my library science class into Ms. Gaffert's class, which is my world history class. And it was in that class, raising my hand to answer a question, that I was going to really kind of make the class laugh, but out of my mouth came the right answer. And everybody was shocked, especially me. And Ms. Gafford took a few moments. She's one of the toughest teachers on the campus. She said, look, if you would stop acting a fool and go home and study, you could be somebody. In retrospect, God's voice spoke through her to me. And I went home.
That really penetrated your thinking when she said that.
Absolutely. And I went home and cried my way through the next few chapters. Turns out that was a world history class. I had a knack for history. And by the end of the year, I was in the top 5 of her class. Wow. I went on the next year, competed and won kind of a regional competition in world history. And I'll call this out as we move forward. The next year, I entered an essay writing competition, which was sponsored by the AFL-CIO, labor union for left.
Yep.
Trying to raise the consciousness of young people with disabilities on high school campuses. I entered the competition, won first place in the state, writing about my special education journey. Wow. Went to compete with 49 others nationally, didn't place. That the following year, which was my senior year, there was another essay writing competition sponsored by the Friends of Free China, which was a Barry Goldwater group. And of course, that's at that time, Barry was Goldwater.
Yeah, pretty conservative guy.
Very much so. And this was all about raising the consciousness of keeping the Republic of China of Taiwan in the national consciousness.
I see.
Anyway,
Yeah. Mhm.
I entered that competition, won first place in the nation,
Wow.
and it was announced on graduation night. I was invited to stand on the stage with the honor students when the announcement was made. And by then, my whole life had been changed. And the place exploded in a standing ovation. My grand aunt was sitting out there, tears coming down her cheek. And the Lord brought back to my memory the prayer I prayed. I was on my way to college, being honored with the honor students, etc.
Quite a transformation. Wow.
And that just started my journey of from elementary to high school. I had this unique combination of African-American teachers like Ms. Gafford and white teachers like Ms. Gehagen, who partnered to really help turn my life around. I had AFL-CIO for left. I had Barry Goldwater that were key strategic moments in my own transformation and journey.
Yep.
I went to an African-American, predominantly African-American college, which is Grambling State University. Graduated from there and went to a predominantly white seminary and liberal for left seminary, San Francisco Theological Seminary, while at the same time being nurtured and rooted in the Bay Area in a African-American, semi-charismatic, reformed, socially engaged Presbyterian church. And so you see all these strings that are happening. And ultimately, the first church I pastored was in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, as a Presbyterian ordained minister. And I was there for 3.5 years. And then I ended up in Boston for 17.5 years. And during that time in Boston, I was invited to be a founding leader of an organization called the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, which initially started by bringing Catholics and Protestant pastors together and ultimately their congregations. Later, Jewish synagogues added, and ultimately Muslims, the Muslim community was added. And when it was all said and done, GBIO became the most powerful kind of religious organization in the state of Massachusetts, helped to win near universal health care. But that journey of helping to build an organization across all these differences left me in a place maybe a year before I exited, that I began to pray, because I was still pastoring a predominantly African-American Presbyterian church, get that, while leading this hyper-diverse community as the president. And I found myself praying that God would begin to send people from all across the Bay Area to form a highly, richly diverse community there in Roxbury. And rather than God doing that, he picked me up and brought me back to the Bay Area as a pastor of Abundant Life Christian Fellowship, which at that time was exactly the makeup of the church that I had been praying for. Rich, broad, deep diversity. And I was there for 2 years, and out of that church, MBCC was born. Now, the distinction between the way Abundant Life kind of functioned, the policy was to ignore the differences because they knew that differences could be divisive, and to try to operate in a way that didn't highlight the differences. And what we've done is we've said, no, the differences are in fact what makes a difference. The fact that we're coming together across these differences, so we're highlighting them. And we're saying that our common point of agreement is the lordship and salvation work of Jesus Christ. And because of that, we are obligated to build bridges that says that we don't just worship together, but we actually learn to do life together. And so that's my story. That's why I think that overall, God has really shaped me for this moment, that MBCC was born for this moment, and hence the Jesus Way practices that we're talking about.
Well, thank you very much. It's really quite a story, and as I said, quite a transformation that brought you to this point in time. And I want to talk a little bit more about New Beginnings, and maybe I should tell a little story of my own, because I think it'll illustrate, what New Beginnings is and how it's really different.
Because you're a founding partner of New Beginnings.
Yeah, I was one of them. It was really an exciting time. The experience I want to talk about is I ended up facilitating, my wife and I, a small group at New Beginnings. And we had maybe, 10 people, 10 or 12 people, something like that. It varied from meeting to meeting, and led that for many years. But what made this group really, really different is that we had people from all sorts of different ethnic backgrounds. There was Asian, Black, there were white. People were at different stages of life. There was single, newly married, some struggling in their marriage, parents raising kids. There were grandparents and even an elderly member. I wasn't quite elderly yet. There
Yeah.
was an elderly member. And politically, we're all over the map. Progressive, conservative, Democrats, Republicans, and I think we even had a libertarian in there. Spiritually, people were at different places. Some
Hmm.
were early in their faith, and others had been following Jesus for decades. And yet, every time we gathered, something meaningful happened.
Mm,
We'd often talk about the sermon, maybe that you preached, or passages from a Bible, and people would share honestly about their lives, the good and the bad, and we'd pray for each other, and we ate together.
mm,
Sometimes the conversations were serious, sometimes they were full of laughter. But over time, what really stood out is that we genuinely cared for each other.
hmm,
We loved each other. And a big part of that was we all shared the same faith in Jesus. And that was the
hmm.
unifying center for us. But it
Yes.
wasn't the only thing. We also discovered that we had a lot in common: love for family, a desire for meaningful relationships, a commitment to our work, a longing to grow. In other words, there was more connecting us in spite of all those differences than what someone might have expected.
Mm.
It was just an incredible experience. And I say all that because I know that my group wasn't unique. It was really what was happening all across the church. And maybe you can go further and talk about that, Pastor Hurmon.
No, that's you're exactly right. I mean, the goal from my end was ultimately to get people into small groups because it's easier to kind of stand in a row and worship together. That doesn't necessarily mean you know each other. But it's a big deal because, as Dr. King said many decades ago, and it remains true today, that 11 o'clock hour is still one of, if not the most segregated hour in
Yeah.
America. It is a big deal. I want to underscore that you do have, and that we had a wide variety of people, as you described, standing side by side and worshiping together. That was a big deal. And
Hmm.
we understood that though as a first step. And the next step was to see could we get people into what we call life groups, small groups,
Hmm.
where people could begin to essentially do life together. And that's, I always like to say diversity is what is most attractive about NBCC. And yet it can be what is the hardest about NBCC once you get into these smaller groups. But most of the groups, as far as kind of a broad experience, are very much like what you described. There are times when politics and other things may come up, but because they've already become a part of each other's story, because they've already, been there serving, loving, caring, praying for one another as you're sharing different things that are coming up in your life.
Hmm.
Somebody is sick, somebody's going through a marital issue, whatever the case is, that when those issues from time to time might come up, you've got the depth of relationship to navigate those issues and not allow them to supplant the main thing, which is the commonality that we have in Jesus.
Right.
So our goal was just really to figure out how to create environments so that that type of small group and depth of relationship could flourish all across the campus, all
Hmm.
across the NBCC community.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what we've worked on. And I've tried to foster it from up front in terms of preaching and teaching. We had great leaders like yourself. And that is the real power behind the NBCC community that we have today.
Well, it's amazing. I mean, it's amazing to be there and to be worshiping together and knowing that there are differences, but
Yes,
the differences are real, but people care for each other. We
that's right.
love each other, and it's an amazing church. Well, I wanted to have this as sort of our introductory episode, talking about it and taking what you've learned and at NBC and NBCC and through your life to reflect on. And I know that you've preached about this and you're writing about this. We want to kind of expand this and go a little bit deeper into the topics of the Jesus way and how everybody can take steps to build bridges across differences. So why don't you just kind of give us some highlights of where we'll be going in this short series that follows along with the book that you're finishing up writing. So why don't you kind of give us an outline of some of the themes that we'll be talking about over the next few episodes?
Yeah, absolutely. And these themes all come from the life of Jesus. And what
Yeah.
I've always said is as I started really engaging this from a writing standpoint, is that even if you don't affirm the divinity of Jesus, the historical reality of Jesus is in and of itself super inspiring, and much to be learned from Jesus, even just from a historical standpoint. And as you read about Jesus, you discover that he practiced 7 things that really helped him to build bridges across differences. And Jesus lived in a time that was highly complicated, super diverse, multiple religious interests, all kinds of socio-political clashing interests. The early church community that came out of the death and resurrection of Jesus was the first and most diverse community in the Western world. So some of the practices are, the 7 practices are: first, engaging at the level of story. In every expression that you read about Jesus through scriptures, you find him, the vast majority, it starts with Jesus engaging people at the level of their story. Long before we talk politics, theology, cultural distinctions, sin, not sin, it's engaging at the level of the story. It's asking the woman at the well, can I have a drink of water? It's asking the man who had been by the pool of Bethesda for 38 years and paralyzed, do you want to be made whole? And generating stories. So that's the first thing we will talk about is, what does it look like to engage people at the level of story, and not to do so to win a point or necessarily even to win them over, but to learn out of a place of curiosity to build real relationships. And then we kind of move from that to the practice of kindness, which is hugely and desperately needed in today's world. In just about every platform, it looks like meanness is what's being rewarded. Ugliness is what's being rewarded. And the culture and the climate cries out for the power of kindness to be released. And then radical empathy. And one of my favorite stories is the Good Samaritan, and where Jesus, he intentionally shapes this story. The Samaritan in that story is the Jesus figure in the story. And he comes across his enemy, the Jewish person who's been beaten and left lying there. But I always like to say the Samaritan saw this Jewish person in the larger context of his story. He saw him wounded and hurt and so forth. And it moved him to empathy, compassion. And so what does it look like to lead out of a place of empathy, to recognize that as we start listening to each other's stories, that behind every divisive issue that you want to name, political, religious, cultural, there's a story. And at the heart of that story is either fear or pain that lies at the nexus of why there's disagreement. And so empathy allows us to move into that space. And then shattering of labels. So often we relate to people vis-a-vis their labels. Well, that's a Republican. Okay, I think I know everything about you because the label Republican. Or that's a Democrat. Or that's an African American. This person is gay or straight, or they're from the South, or these from the North or the East Coast. All these different ways of labeling people, and in a sense, taking a kind of shortcut way of saying, "Oh, I got this person and I understand them." In fact, that's just not the case. And then redemptive forgiveness is huge. Where there's been breaches in families and relationships and friendships, the only way to heal those breaches is action. And I use the term redemptive forgiveness because part of our ability to forgive is to understand that there is more to the narrative, the story that led to our hurt. And so Jesus, when he says, Father forgives them for they know not what they do, Father forgive them for they know what they do, he's saying they think they know, but they actually really don't. So this work, a lot of work we do around redemptive forgiveness. And then finally, what I like to call life-changing generosity. And again, you see this, the scripture tells us that God so loved the world that he gave. That's a term of generosity, his only begotten son. Or the early church would relate to 1 John 3. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ gave up his life for us, and we ought to give. It's the Samaritan who uses his own resources in the Good Samaritan story to bandits up an enemy, takes him to a hotel, stays up with him all night, taking care of him, and then says, put whatever else is needed on my bill the next day. To do that for someone who's kind of an arch enemy, there's no way you could be that kind of level of generous and it not change your life. That's what I refer to as life-changing generosity. As a matter of fact, when you practice these other practices, they in and of themselves require a heart of generosity in order to do that kind of work. So those are some of that's the kind of pathway I think that we'll walk down together.
Great topics. I look forward to our upcoming conversations, Pastor Hurmon. And today, let me end with a reflection for our listeners to consider. Think of one person with whom you have a strained or broken relationship. It may be because of politics, values, lifestyle, or something else deeply personal. Think about what they care about, what really matters to them. Perhaps what they care about is the source of your disagreement. And here's something to consider. Think about what you have in common. I suspect you have more in common than you may realize. Could be values, experiences, fun activities you shared, or even topics you agree on. Discussing what you have in common may be the place where healing begins. Jesus consistently looked beyond disagreement to the person behind it. He found common humanity where others saw division. Perhaps he is inviting us to do the same. If our discussion today resonated with you, please join us for our upcoming episodes. Pastor Hurmon and I will explore critical practices that can help heal relationships, extend grace, and love others well. And if you are a leader, and most of us are leaders in some way, at home, at work, or in a volunteer activity, you might find it meaningful to listen to my comments on leadership that accompany this podcast and will accompany subsequent podcasts. The series is called Leading the Jesus Way, and you'll find links to episodes of both Living the Jesus Way and Leading the Jesus Way at skipvaccarello.com. You can also listen on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. And to hear sermons on the Jesus Way and other messages from Pastor Hurmon, go to nbccbayarea.com. I hope you'll join us next time when we explore the power of engaging at the level of story. Until then, may each of us take one small step toward living and leading the Jesus way. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, Pastor Hurmon.
Thank you, Skip.